Chris Watzkow from CBC Radio. I wanted to ask about, in the international context, and this is going ahead a few years, but when you look at the specter of mass-scale environmental refugees, whether it's because of drought and desertification in sub-Saharan Africa or rising sea levels inundating places like Bangladesh, what do you envision, or what kind of scenarios do you see for how the international community and countries like Canada are going to be asked to deal with this, both from a financial and a logistical point of view?
The first thing to recognize is that if we act responsibly and sensibly as a world now, we can really reduce those kinds of risks drastically. So the report actually was quite optimistic in many ways, in coming to the conclusion that there was a great deal we can do, I say, provided we acted sensibly and quickly, to reduce those kinds of risks. So that's the first thing that we should learn from these possibilities, and they are possibilities, is that we should act strongly to reduce the risks of big population movements. Second, the whole story of adaptation in developing countries is one of major importance. There are lots of parts of Asia which are dependent on the snows and glaciers of the Himalayas to give them even flows of water through the year. So it's not just Bangladesh that's under risk from sea level rise. There are other parts, and they're neighbours of Bangladesh, that are at risk in different kinds of ways, from the disruption of the monsoon, from the drying of the rivers in the summer, from the torrents that they'll get, the drying of the rivers in the dry seasons, and the torrents that they'll get in the rainy seasons. So there are all kinds of movements of population that could result from that. So the important thing is, first, to reduce the risks by moving to low-carbon economies around the world. Second, to invest in adaptation now and to think ahead what those challenges will be. So in some countries, it'll be important to build stronger seawalls. Other countries, it's important to build different kinds of irrigation systems and develop different kinds of crops. So those, again, are the kind of actions that are necessary to reduce the risks through investment in adaptation. Ultimately, we do run those risks, and we've seen just how serious they are, for example, in Darfur, where part of the story, Darfur is a very complicated story, of course, in Sudan, but part of the story is very long periods of drought, or actually, it's not simply drought, it's changing climate, have led pastoralists to move and to come into conflict with those in settled agriculture. So we're already seeing some parts of that story of population movement, and we have to deal with that as it happens. But the wise thing to do is to reduce the risk through going to a low-carbon economy and helping poor countries with the investments necessary for adaptation.
Karim Jinko de Radio-Canada. Est-ce qu'il y a une solution en dehors du protocole de Kyoto, et quels sont les avantages sur le plan économique de lutter contre le réchauffement climatique?
Est-ce que j'ai le droit de répondre en anglais?
Idéalement, je souhaiterais en français.
Peut-être on peut mélanger les langues. Oui. Je vais commencer en anglais si j'ai permission. The individual countries around the world can take and should take their own decisions. I can't call California a country, but they have set themselves an 80% target. That wasn't an internationally negotiated Kyoto measure. It was a recognition of what they saw as responsible behavior. France set itself a 75%, le facteur 4, which was introduced by President Chirac a long time ago, was their 75% reduction by 2050. The UK has got at least 60% by 2050. These are decisions which an individual country takes because it believes itself to be responsible, regards that as responsible behavior. The context of the Kyoto Treaty and the period thinking beyond that after 2012 is very important as a framework for collaboration. And I think the countries around the world should be thinking very hard as to how they move forward in that post-2012 era. But they can take the responsibilities and should take directly those responsibilities themselves. Was there anything else you wanted me to cover in that? Il y avait d'autres choses ou...
Quels sont les avantages pour l'économie mondiale de lutter contre le réchauffement climatique?
C'est que j'ai dit en avant, on peut supporter une économie en développement avec un taux de croissance assez élevé, en même temps qu'on suit les actions pour réduire le carbone. Alors, on peut faire le même. C'est pas un grand conflit entre d'être vert et d'avoir un taux de croissance assez élevé. Il faut les investissements en technologie. Il faut un prix dans les marchés pour carbone. Mais avec les politiques comme ça, on peut supporter tous les deux en même temps. Et ça, c'est très important pour comprendre l'économie de l'environnement, l'économie du changement climatique. Et c'est ça en Europe. Maintenant, dans les discussions dans l'Union européenne, qui a changé l'atmosphère, si je peux utiliser le terme, l'atmosphère de débat.
Peter Gorey from the Toronto Star. In terms of the economic instruments you talked about, I'm just wondering where in your view, carbon taxes would rank. How effective would they be, and what level would they have to be at to have the impact that's required?
A price for carbon is very important to get the economic incentives right. There are various ways of doing that. You can have a carbon tax. For example, in Europe, we have a strong taxation of gasoline. You can do it through cap and trade. Again, in Europe, half of the emissions in Europe are subject to the European Union emissions trading scheme. And when I was testifying on Capitol Hill on Tuesday last week to Senator Bingham's Energy Committee, there was a lot of detailed discussion of these cap and trade schemes, where the firms are given maximum amount that they can emit, and if they want to go beyond that, they have to buy these permits on the market. That's why we call it cap and trade. Or you can get your prices through regulation. You can insist that there are certain standards for electrical appliances. They might cost a little bit more, but the implicit price is the extra cost divided by the carbon saved. So some kind of price for carbon is very important. In the review, we argued that if the world does follow responsible policies, then an appropriate price for carbon would likely to be in the area of $35 a tonne of CO2. But the approach we adopted was to say, let's cap worldwide consistent with the kind of path I was describing. And then let's each country take its responsibilities, and then each country allocate amongst firms if you're going the cap and trade route, and that the market will determine what the price of carbon will be in that context. But our best guess in the review, provided we follow responsible policies worldwide, would be around $35 a tonne. If you assume that the world is going to do nothing, then and go on a strongly rising trend of stocks of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, then you might come to rather higher figures than that for the social cost of carbon. But responsible policies could be supported by $35 a tonne, roughly speaking. But we'll find out by using the market. This is very much a market-based approach that we were advocating here.